Hey there, sixth graders. We are on page 11. No, page 12. Yes, page 12 in our data books. We are doing our first page here is going to be bar graph versus histogram. And hopefully you have these two images kind of glued into your data book already. So we don't really just learn about bar graph. We're basically learning about the histogram, but it's important to note the difference between the two. So that's why we have one page called bar graph versus histogram. So take a second before I point anything out to you. I want you to look at these pictures and see if you can notice maybe what the bigger differences are between a bar graph and a histogram. So you'll see that the bottom one down here is a histogram. And your top one is your bar graph. But what's the difference between the two? What makes them unique? So notice a couple of things about those two images. Now down below here, we're going to take what we're seeing up there and we're going to put that into a Venn diagram. So we're going to see if we can point out the things. Now one of the tougher topics or differences between the two, I already have written on there. Remember, a Venn diagram is our two circles here, and they compare and contrast. So whatever's in the middle is going to be things that they have alike, and the things on the outside are going to be unique to them. So over in a bar graph, that is categorical data. So you'll see it has soccer and softball and basketball and other. So those aren't numbers, they're categories. Whereas the numerical data, you'll see down here, we see numbers is what we're graphing. Now that's one of the big differences. Some of you might have also noticed that in the bar graph, there are spaces in between. So we're looking up here. There is space in between each of the bars. See the space? So that space makes a bar graph unique. Space between bars. Because if you look over at the histogram right here, when they are next to each other, there is no space. Now you see this space right here, but that's not space between the bars. That's just space because that one doesn't have anything in its range. But there isn't supposed to be space unless there's a blank one. So this one has no spaces between. They lay right next to each other. Now the second thing is about the histogram is you'll notice it's not just a number line down here. It's not like it's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. It is a range of numbers. So we have to include a range of numbers for each of those bars. Like the first one, it says 1 to 20, 21 to 40. So they're all a range. Now similarities. Obviously, this isn't our data unit. They are both going to be graphs. They're both ways that we can put information on there. And they both use bars to represent those numbers or those categories. And then also, another thing that I want you to notice is over here on the sides of both of them, how high those bars go depends on the numbers over on the side, or what we call the y-axis. So we have those y-axis numbers over on the side, and that tells us how high the bars are going. So we always have to have numbers over there. Okay, now that we see the similarities and differences, we're going to spend some more time just on histogram. So go over to your next page. Okay, page 2 here. Well, it's actually your page 13. This is just about histograms. You can't really read that. So for just a histogram, like we just said, it's a graph that does numerical data. And it shows, that's what that says, shows frequency is what it shows. And here are our steps to create this now. So our first step is going to be we use a frequency table to organize the data. So we have to pick a range because we can't just pick like how many people are 6 years old, how many people are 7 years old. So the example over here that we're using is the age of people at a movie. So we don't know what the movie is, but they asked people what their age was at that movie. We can't just say how many people in here are 10 because that's not a range of numbers. So they picked every 5 years. So they said, okay, we'll see how many people are 6 to 10 years old, or 11 to 15, or 16 to 20. And then they filled in the numbers below. That's a frequency table. So 8 people were the age 6 to 10. 5 people were age 11 to 15. 2 people were 16 to 20. Now that we have this table made, that helps us to make our histogram because we have the table filled out. Our second step over here is we're going to create bars for each range. So you'll see what I did over here. For each of those ranges that I used up there, 6 to 10, 11 to 15, and 16 to 20, we have to put those at the bottom underneath. And remember, our bars must touch. And then lastly, we're going to build up the height depending on the frequency. So the age 6 to 10, there were 8 people. So we had to go up to 8 and over and then fill in from there. Age 11 to 15, there were 5 people. So we had to go up to 5 and fill in from there. And the last one was 16 to 20, and that had only 2 people. So that would go up from there. Now, the last thing that we're going to look at here is we're going to look at the shape, because just like all of our other ones, we have shape and range and all of that stuff. Now, I know this piece of paper is like really terrible to read. I'm not so worried about the numbers on there. We're just going to do our shape like our mountain and our skiing, just so we can see what it looks like. So my first one here, remember we always follow the pattern. This one just goes straight across. What did we call that shape? We called that uniform when it goes straight across. Then this one over here, it goes up, it goes down, it goes way down, back up a little bit. So if we were skiing on this, we would be skiing down to the right, so it would be skewed right. And then our last one, when we follow this, it looks pretty darn similar on both sides, so we would call that symmetrical. Perfect. Now, the last thing I wanted to point out here was our spread or our range, because we also have a spread or a range on histograms. Remember, those mean the same thing. It's our biggest number minus our smallest number. So in these, because there's a frequency, let's say, I'm just making this up because I can't really read those numbers, but let's say the smallest number over here on this one, it was doing 10 to 20. And over here, they did 81 or 91 to 100. You have to pick your biggest number and your smallest number. So I would pick 10, and I would pick 100, and I would do 100, take away 10, and my my spread or my range would then be 90. So when you're doing the spread, pick the biggest number for your biggest, and pick the smallest number in your smallest range, and that is what you subtract to get your spread or your range. Awesome, you guys are set to go. Thank you for getting your histogram done, and we will work with this more tomorrow so you feel better about it. Thank you for getting it done. See you soon.